Okay, so hi everyone. It's good to see colleagues, friends, students, some new faces, and the Jesuit priests on campus during this interesting Zoom COVID era. Thanks to technology, while we are distant from each other, we are still socially connected. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I am Gloria Jian. I teach Buddhist meditation and Asian religions in the Religious Studies Department at Gonzaga University. It is my pleasure to have Dr. Todd Lewis from the College of Holy Cross, a fellow Jesuit university, to give his talk about Jesuit missionaries in Japan and Zen tea. I would like to first acknowledge the financial sponsorship from the Speaker Series Committee of Faculty Senate. The committee offered me this great opportunity to invite Dr. Lewis to share his research. Also, I would like to extend thanks for the publicity support from the Religious Studies Department, the Office of Mission and Ministry, and the Center for Global Engagement, CGE. Katie Nothenberger from CGE in particular helped with flyer design and the Zoom registration. CGE will have a tea testing event following today's lecture. So I will let Katie briefly talk about the tea testing event before I introduce our speaker. So Katie, yeah.
Thanks, Gloria. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all here. We are having a tea tastings event on March 8th, and we'd love you to join us. It is remote, but we will have tea at CGE that you'll be able to pick up, and we'll all sort of taste it together, but separately. I'll put the flyer here in the chat, and you can sign up that way as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Katie. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. As you can see, he has a beautiful tea garden as his background. Dr. Todd Lewis holds the Monsignor Edward G. Murray Distinguished Professorship at the College of Holy Cross. This position recognizes outstanding scholarly and pedagogical achievements. He received his PhD in religion at Columbia University and has specialized in Newar Buddhism in the Kathmandu Valley, Nepal. While Dr. Lewis is a leading scholar on the religions of the Himalayan region, his research and teaching have also been interdisciplinary, linking anthropology, the history of religions, and Indology. In addition to writing over 40 articles, Dr. Lewis has published, co-authored, and edited 13 books related to Newar Buddhism, Buddhist traditions in the Himalayan region, Buddhist narratives and poetry, the role of merchants in Buddhist history, teaching Buddhism, and Asian religions. His book, Skata Sarabha, an epic poem from Nepal on the life of the Buddha, by Shtata Hridaya, published by Oxford University Press in 2010, won the Tushihite Numata Book Award and the prize for Outstanding Translation awarded by the Kensei Foundation. Furthermore, Dr. Lewis has authored or edited college textbooks on Asian religions and Buddhism. He teaches diverse subjects related to Buddhism and Hinduism. His course on Zen Buddhism was featured in 2014 in Holy Cross magazine. In today's talk, Jesuit missionaries in Japan and the tea traditions of the Zen Elite, Dr. Lewis will examine the fruitful early encounter between the first generations of Jesuit missionaries in Japan and the tea traditions, Zado, that flourished among the Zen elite between the late 16th and the early 17th century. We will have Dr. Lewis talk for around 1 hour, and then we will open the floor to discussion. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Todd Lewis.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be at Gonzaga University, where I've never been before. I guess I'm there and with electrons, but not molecules. And I hope to visit your campus one day. And we're expecting to invite Gloria to come and talk about her teachings about meditation and the adaptation of a specific Tibetan form of meditation to student spirituality. We've built a very nice retreat house that just opened a few years ago that overlooks one of the big reservoirs in Massachusetts. And we're looking to expand these kinds of programs. So this will give me a chance to reciprocate, and hopefully Gloria will come in person when we get around to doing this. So thanks for the invitation. I love to talk about this subject and to explore ways that my own work in Asian religions connected with my commitment to education and being hired at a Jesuit college, liberal arts college, 30 years ago, 31 years now, and provided a way for me to figure out how, as a Protestant specialist in Eastern religion, how I could figure out how to contribute something to the culture and community of Holy Cross. So that's part of what my talk will cover today as well. Sort of the journey I went on trying to publicize and then build a campus Japanese garden. It's still not happened yet, but the process itself is what taught me so much of what I'm going to share with you today. And I would like to acknowledge that students in this infamous, famous Zen seminar also have been very engaged over the years. And they did some of the research that got me interested in the Jesuit connections to Japan, which are quite extraordinary, and which we have shared with our own community. And there's still hope that we will build this garden and tea house one day. And I will use our campus design to talk about the Jesuits in Japan and why this is a natural expression of what was a very dynamic period in Jesuit history when they fanned out on the wings of these new arising trade routes and empire to make connections, and to do so really fearlessly in their interest in spreading Christianity to all these places, but also to do so in a way that was anything but superficial, especially in the case of Japan. So with that in mind, let's see if the technology and Murphy's Law has been suspended at Gonzaga University. And I will try to now to share my screen. So, do you see a rabbit? Uh-oh, share now. It's working? Oh, that's a relief. Okay. So, this is a rather unlikely juxtaposition at first. Jesuits and the elite tradition of tea that formed in and around Osaka, Kyoto, it began in the 15th century and had developed quite a bit by the time the first Jesuits come and stay for long periods and begin to experience the culture of the Japanese in a serious, sustained way. And so this is a fascinating moment in history that I want to share with you. Now, I do want to connect very directly and in the background of this talk, and then I'll eventually go through our design and talk about the different elements. There are actually two kinds of Japanese gardens I'm going to mention. And to say that first, I taught at Carleton College back in when I was young and just getting started. I filled in there for a year. And Carleton has a Japanese garden that they built in the mid 80s. And it's on the edge of campus, and it's really a fantastic place. You can talk about Japan, you can try to teach Asian religions, but when you can give people a taste of what an authentic environment is, or a building is, or a garden is, you've really you've enhanced your pedagogical reach and effectiveness. Of course, the best thing to do is to take students there, but this is also something that can be a permanent resource on campus. And Carleton has maintained this garden up to the present day. In my view, they only have a little hut that isn't even closed to the weather. And if you know Minnesota and Carleton at all, you know that it's winter there about 8 months of the year, at least it feels that way. So when I thought about, okay, why don't I do this at Holy Cross? I wanted to develop and have a building where we could have programs, seminars, and other things. And I'll get to talk about that to some extent. But when I sort of formed this resolution to do it and to pursue it, I immediately found friends on the faculty, from biology professors who wanted to grow exotic trees to art historians and others. And so I sort of talked my way to the president at the time, who was a former Gonzaga faculty member named Michael McFarland. I don't know if any of you all knew Michael. He was a computer and math professor, I believe. And he understood what we were talking about. And finally, we went to the trustees with the proposal, and they said, okay, do the study and see how realistic it is. And so they hired the man on the right here. His name is Mark Keene. He's one of the leading garden designers, Japanese garden designers in North America, although about a year ago, he moved back to Japan, where he lived for 20 years before coming back here about the year 2000. And so Mark designed a garden for us that we could at least use for to raise the funds necessary to it. So the trustees approved things, but they didn't approve budgeting it. We had to find a donor or donors for this. So that's what this was about. But they paid good money to do this design, because I think, sometimes I wonder, but I think they were quite serious about this. And so we wanted to pursue the project then. So we had to have everything from the grounds people to the others involved in every aspect of this, from architects. We had to deal with the public access issues. And so Keene's design is fit between two buildings, one a classroom and the other is a dormitory. And so that's what it looks like. If you know Holy Cross, this is right below the main entrance to the campus called Linden Lane. And it's sort of set into a hillside so that it's not some distant place on the edge of the campus. We wanted to emphasize, and some of the Jesuits, such as Bill Reiser in my department, said, this is an important expression of Jesuit identity, and Holy Cross has 20 Asian studies professors, so we should not let our light shine in a basket. We should have this front and center on campus. So that was the goal, the boldness of the location of this here. And because it filled a need, this is a very ugly space between buildings. And so Keene designed not only the complex of Japanese viewing garden and a tea garden, but also a kind of accessible classroom space in this bermed area on the right, if you're looking at that. And so this is the whole design as he presented it. And the trustees approved it, and we had to go through the budget process, which is if you've never done it, it's a completely bewildering experience dealing with people who we now call them, they used to be called the development office, and now they've changed the name to being, I forget what it's some other advancement. They're the advancement office. So what is basically a large single room structure with a traditional Japanese tea room and rake gravel and a moss walkthrough garden somehow ends up to be $4.2 million. In Massachusetts, I could build 2 mansions for that, but this is the way it goes with advancement thinking and raising enough money to pay for the maintenance and all that kind of thing. Anyway, it was approved about 15 years ago, and we're still looking for a donor. The office that looked for donors, the advancement office, then we've had 3 or 4 people, directors pass through. We had some near misses, but we're still stuck in this stage. And I don't know when I'm going to retire, but there's sort of an expiration date on my willingness to, be part of such a huge undertaking, because for a year or two, this will be a major activity. It'll take over my life. So the tea tradition and the garden tradition come together in Japan in several ways. One is as a retreat. Often it was in the backyards of estates that were fronted on streets, and the tea room and the garden to it provided an escape from the dusty world of the floating world, sometimes referred to in Japanese, of the life in Osaka, where trade is developing, trade with China, trade with the rest of the world. And a merchant class was forming that became very interested and even obsessed by tea. And so they built these tea rooms. And so that's what we propose to have in our campus garden. And then the other building that we want to have is, we call this a multi-purpose room. It's a tatami room. And it can be a place for seminars or other activities such as meditation clubs, such as a small concert space. But it's roughly 30 by 40 feet. And so that's the second. And this garden, this building then looks out onto the other kind of Japanese garden called the karasansui, which is a dry garden. And this is the kind of garden, well, you can see an example of it behind me, which is from the Portland Japanese garden. So these are spaces not meant to be walked through, but to be viewed from a specific vantage point in a Japanese building or home. Or nowadays in Japan, you find these next as parts extensions of inns. And this whole way of living and this building in this way with very simple forms is called the Sukiya style. And this Sukiya style is especially noted for the lack of separation in aesthetic experience and in visual presence, that there's no real clear distinction between inside and outside. The outdoors is invited in, and so the garden, in a sense, becomes an extension of the room. So let me talk about these features of Sukiya style of this room and the 2 kinds of gardens now as a way of treating the whole subject, and then we'll get to the Jesuit connection with this. So the main room, which is a post and beam building, would be one of that could be, as I say, used for a variety of purposes. It has the tatami floors in which you have to take your shoes off to walk on them, and we had to add things like proper bathrooms and all. And we got to the stage where the trustees wanted a real plan, and we have closets, and this could be used for retreats. So you could have futons, bedding there. And there can also be on-floor chairs and a seminar table as well. And so the space has to accommodate this multi-purpose form. And you can see that there's an entrance on the left side where there would be these spaces have to be protected. So I think we'll have a work study student staying around the entrance on the lower left corner. And then there's a walkway that leads to one entrance, in which you step up, you come in and you step up and come in this way, or you go around another way, a longer way to enter with a step up stone here, and then you can access the room. So this is the way, and this is a typical design. You can see this in Portland and other buildings like this are built around the country. There's a prominent one in Huntington, California, as well as in Philadelphia. So this reflects that design. So what does it look like inside? It's a tatami room. These are what the mats look like. They can be taken out and flipped over. And there's storage located up in cabinets. And I'm just giving you examples from what you can see and where I've traveled myself. There's always a niche in these rooms that are used for tea demonstrations called the tokonoma, in which a scroll or a vase with flowers will be placed. And these reflect, if you're having a gathering in this space, the season and the time of year and the moment or the special occasion. So that's the way the building is designed to accommodate these cultural preferences. And then on the left side here, these doors would slide open. These are paper. This is a bit of a problem in New England when we have 18 inches of snow now, but it gets pretty cold. And paper walls aren't great at insulation. So I don't know quite how we'll deal with that. But anyway, these open up, and if you look where the arrow is, it looks out onto the dry garden. And so that's what I want to show you next. And Keen just made a generic design here, but this is looking out from inside the tatami room. Is that you see this, he has a wooden fence defining this space and then building up both vegetation as well as stone. So this is a rough suggestion. This isn't, we haven't actually made the precise design that he's calling for, but I want to give you a little sense of that and how that works. And so the gravel is raked, and it's part of the discipline of the garden, both to prune the trees and to take the sticks away that inevitably and leaves that fall, and then to maintain a kind of design in the sand. And the designs can be changed and vary with the seasons as well. There are whole manuals on how to rake stones, as well as manuals on every other thing like pruning. And the setting of stones is a special art that you call in a special person to do this. And there's nothing random or accidental in this. So you're creating a world, you're designing a natural space completely by human intervention here. This will give you another sense of that. It's not exactly what we're calling for, but that's the kind of outlook. And our design has an extension on the veranda out that extends from this view. So it's possible just to sit outside and look at the garden as well. Some people think that these gardens are meant to be part of meditation, but they're not. They're just part of the aesthetic, the simplicity and the straight line designs and this feeling of wabi, of reality boiled down to its essentials. It's the bones of the garden or the stones, but you're living in a world that's very simplified, so that your mind has room to think clearly and wander. Now, this is where I wanted to introduce and give you some sense of what these first our pioneering Jesuits were thinking. What you can see on the screen is the reaction of one man named Louis Fro, who was very taken by, as many of the Jesuits were, they were very taken by the utter originality of the Japanese architecture and especially their gardens. And they clearly were looking at, what we would see today. This is the conservatism of Japanese culture and their love of these spaces. It's remarkable. I was in Japan a year and a half ago, and in so many ways they express a certain kind, this wabi aesthetic that still has a place in Japanese culture and in the Japanese imagination of ideal spaces. And in another place, and I don't have all the quotes that you can get from the writings of the Jesuits. There's a whole volume that a Jesuit named Michael Cooper collected all their writings, all their letters, what they said about Japan. It's really fantastically useful scholarly source. But one Jesuit contrasted, the wabi style is not symmetrical. It's not, it doesn't, there is no one perspective that's imposed or design that's imposed on the space. It has a kind of randomness and naturalness that's there. And this one Jesuit contrasted this to some of the Renaissance gardens, which imposed a kind of military precision and geometrical regularity on a garden, so that the plants were all exactly spaced the same, and they were set up in exactly the semicircular design. And he said, well, I find when I was in Spain that these gardens were boring to me because they were predictable. There's nothing predictable about these Japanese gardens. If you follow the poetry of the design, you're constantly smiling and being refreshed by the originality and sometimes the cheekiness of the designer, who will put big rocks in front and smaller rocks in back and arrange things so that they're never old and you can see them every day and feel you see something new every day. So anyway, that's, so as is often the case, I mean, if you've traveled in Asia or elsewhere, sometimes that when you first get there, you have a very fresh and original insight. You see things with a clarity that as you stay there longer and longer, you may not notice so much. And so some of these Jesuits were visiting for short periods of time, but their perceptions are very acute. It's like if you're keeping a journal, when you first get to a place, you should write in your journal, because there is this period of where you notice things more than you will later. Anyway, this is from a painting that was executed at this time, and I have a couple examples of it. And if anyone's interested, Gloria or I can share with you an article that was just published in the Journal of the North American Japanese Garden Association, in which all this is covered with in somewhat greater, much greater detail. But here you see the Jesuits, and they seem to be visiting one of their own places, because I think they're Europeans inside. I think they're attendants inside. There's no information from the source of this painting from which this is excerpted. But I think it's fascinating. These cross-cultural historical moments are moments of great interest to me as a scholar. Buddhism went to China and then Japan. How that happened and what perceptions were very interesting to consider and to study. Now, the second kind of space, garden space, that our design includes is called the Roji garden, which means the stroll garden. It literally means the dewy path to the tea house. Now, if you look within the box in the lower right side, that center is the 4.5 mat tea room right there. And here is the entrance. And this is the tokonoma, where the display is arranged with a painting or a flower arrangement. And the garden itself, if you look at our design, you can go into the multi-purpose room, or you can go again on this other path that leads to a gateway. And I'll talk about that in a second. This path right here, this little section, took a year to figure out for our campus design, because the Americans for Disability Act requires that there be access for people with any kind of inability to walk. Has to be friendly to wheelchairs. Well, when I'll show you the pictures of what the Dewey path looks like, they're irregular. They make you look down at your feet if you have no handicaps of any sort. So it's like a torture. It would be torturous to have a person in a wheelchair try to negotiate this. So we had to work out with the lawyers and the architects. And the solution was, there's a lift would be built into this place right here. And someone then who wants to attend the tea house can go through the main building to do so. But that took forever. I think they had other things they were working on too. But this is the Rogi space to the tea house. And the garden, in a way, provides for what people must do when they go to a tea ceremony. The tea master will invite them, and he will tell them what time to come. And when the guests arrive, and learning to be a guest is a long, it requires some study and some experience and instruction. But the space of the tea house is marked with this second gate that's located here. And then the guests will go and they will sit on a bench or in some kind of shelter until the tea master actually fetches them, indicates that it's time to come. And so this shelter is an important part of the Rogi garden design. And once they're told to come, they walk along the pathway, and they have one other stop they must make, which is to the water basin, in which they, using a dipper, they rinse their mouths so as to purify themselves for the tea ceremony that's going to take place. And then they continue to come inside to the building itself. So this is all then the garden thinks for them. The garden provides what needs to be provided. This walking through the path is supposed to induce an awareness that you're entering into another world, that this is a world completely separate from the floating world, the dusty world. In Buddhist vocabulary, this is samsara. This is the troubled place of suffering. And so the garden path is designed for you not necessarily to see where you're going to arrive. It promotes a sense of the tea house as a place apart. And so these are all examples of different designs that you can have for this. But if you imagine a wheelchair negotiating this, it's quite impossible. So that's the Rogi path in part, but the plants and all that are arranged around it are quite dramatic. And here is what these guests in this traditional painting have come in through the main gate, the inner gate, and now they're waiting. Sometimes the tea master will put snacks or other things out on this bench, and they patiently await and engage in modest but conversation, not about the world outside, but about the world that they see and what the tea master has created as this environment. Then when they're called, and the way they're called, by the way, is you put a stone with a rope tied around it, and the tea master will come and remove this stone to indicate it's time to come. And so after, as he's doing that and putting away his blocker stone, the guests all come and they rinse their mouths, as you see in the upper right side. And part of the artistry and the aesthetic of this garden is that these basins can often repurposed from from their original purpose, but they're quite. They have to be very effective because rinsing the mouth is part of the ritual of tea, in which you prepare for this extraordinary aesthetic experience. By the way, they're illustrated manuals for all of these, how to do it. I mean, what I'm giving you here is one school in Japan called the Urasenke School. They have detailed guides of every second that you do this. So what you're seeing here is how to pour the ladle onto the hand, use the hand to rinse the mouth, and then how to purify the ladle. What you see here is you let the water come out and drip down the handle to even remove the trace of your handprint on it, or at least ritually speaking, and then you put the ladle back. There are hundreds of pictures of instructions like this in the manuals. It's quite wonderful, but it's so Japanese that they want you to know how the angle of the wrist when you hold the dipper. So now you come into the tea house itself, and here you see in this little building, you see a lowered place, a sunken place for the traditional charcoal heater, which is used to heat the water. And the master and different schools have slightly different versions of this. There are 4 or 5 major schools. Urasenke is by far the largest. And the master will sit here on the right picture you see, and he'll sit here and he'll heat, he'll purify all the components. Then he'll put tea in a bowl and add boiling water to it and then serve it to the guests. So that's the setup for that will be arranged. The guests will be along here, and then the tea master will sit here, and he'll have to move to offer the tea to the guests. And then this is the tokonoma. You see another just example of that. I think it's the same picture I used before. And then there's a whole other art that's related to tea. In a way, the tea ceremony includes all of the arts, the fine arts of Japan. Calligraphy, painting. You can put your own painting in the tokonoma. You can arrange flowers in any one of number of different schools, either in a vase or a water container that's low, and other possibilities. So, but it's done that day. It's done to reflect the time. It's done to reflect the season. It's done to reflect the guests. So there is this moment orientation to tea that is essential in the mastery of hosting such a gathering. Okay, everything's still working. Zoom is still on. And so the guests come into the tea room. And if you have a samurai sword and you're a member of that class, there's a special, it's too dark to see it in here. There's a special shelf here. No swords allowed inside the tea room. You're supposed to now the garden gets you almost there, but then you see some gardens on the upper right have these sort of artificial walls to make you physically experience that this tea experience is a world apart. And so then you go in through and you have to bend down to get through the very small door of the tea house, leaving your shoes behind, of course. And then there's this gathering of 1 or more, up to 3 people, to have tea and have tea built, tea made in this built environment that's designed to for this moment. The whole of the tea house is now sort of engaged with this very quiet. Everyone's silent when the master is making the tea.
No, it's just some weird meeting that I don't know what's going on, but
Something wrong?
No, please keep going. Yeah, everything's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, I just heard someone come through on the audio, and so everyone's quiet. You're supposed to be able to hear the boiling of the water in the kettle, And when the master draws out some of the water, the tone changes, and the frequency of the bubbles change the experience. So you're in this room and it's all silent except for the making of the tea. The whisking of the tea has a certain sound. The clink of the very small ladle that you put the tea into the bowl has a sound. And that's all part of the master's sharing that with you, and you're appreciating it in silence as a guest. And so finally, there is the presentation of the tea after it's whisked. This can vary depending on the season, and there's thick tea and there's thin tea. If before you have thick tea, you have to have some kind of sweet. And if you've ever traveled in Japan and gone to these little sweet shops, they have the greatest sweetness and concentration of flavor that you can find, I think, in any food. Maybe the Italians and some of their gelatos have a pretty close to this, but there's no gelato at a tea house that I ever heard of. But they make these very precious little sweets, and they prepare your palate for this somewhat bitter tea, but it's the strongest tea you'll ever drink. It's quite a buzz when you take the entire tea. And so this shows the master sharing the tea in the middle of, this is another from their instruction books, but finally you share the tea, and the only thing that's said is thank you, and then you apologize. You always apologize to the others if you're the first one to get the tea. You apologize that, oh, I'm sorry to go first. You know, Japanese, we all apologize a lot, but Japanese apologies are just nonstop almost, and little punctuations of the experience. And you'll have to go back and make the second and third tea bowl and serve. And there's a whole way to hold the bowl and you can slurp it if you want. And then there's a whole aesthetic about the bowls. They, like the garden, should not be perfectly symmetrical. They can have imperfections. And at the end, when everyone's had their tea, then it's the time for the main guest, the first in line, to perhaps have a few words of appreciation about the bowl with the tea maker. So it's just what's in front of us. It's what's our immediate experience in the room. And of course, you're always thanking for expressing gratitude for the master's attentions and the skill of his presentation. And this whisking of the tea is also a special art with chasen, that sort of whisk. This chasen is made from a single piece of bamboo. And if you go to Urasenke and study for a year there, the first job you have to learn how to do is to take a very sharp knife and to carve the bamboo so it becomes like this. And so this is so the tea master actually is master of the garden, is a master of the tools and implements. They make them if they need to. Some today are even still potters as well. There's a person I've had come to Holy Cross who's a graduate of the Urasenke school, and she lives down in the Bay Area. And her specialty is cooking for the tea ceremony. There are longer forms of tea ceremony that can involve the service of a whole meal. But her name is Jennifer Anderson. Jennifer also makes these kinds of sweets as well. So, it's not just tea, it's the entire life and the handmade custom construction of an experience and all that goes into it. Even preparing the garden before the guests come is part of the tea master's duty. Now, what I found so fascinating as I got further into this, I was teaching tea before I had any idea of, this connection. Everyone knows that some of the founders of tea began in the 15th century, and that it became de rigueur for the samurai to for many of them to be part of tea. So you had these real tough guys, these swordsmen, who would also get, most of them got very humble and simple going to the tea ceremony led by these masters. But once this Jesuit general for all of Asia named Alessandro Valignano, once he came to Japan, he sort of made a circuit around from Goa to Japan to Macau, where he was centered, and he liked Japan very much, and his mind was a very refined one, and I think he immediately understood that this tea and the tea culture was what the Jesuits should embrace fully. Now, I know there may be some questions, and we can discuss this, because I'm no expert on Jesuit missionary practice, but their early attitude, if you read the works of Matteo Ricci, for example, who went to China, their whole idea was in the early days is if you convert the elite, the leaders, or the cultural and the wealthy in that society, that influence would kind of trickle down and affect the effective conversion of many more people. And indeed, tea is that. There's no doubt about that. This is what rich people did, and it was a huge cultural wave that spread across, especially these mercantile families who were making lots of money importing Chinese and other goods into Japan. And so Valignano said that, okay, we have to have a tea room in every Jesuit house, and there has to be someone there who can present the tea. And you can't use the tea room for anything else. You can't use it for bingo or anything, just kidding, but you can't use it for anything else. It's a tea room, nothing else. And the place had to be kept ready for guests. So that's, we don't know to what extent, and it's even uncertain how many Jesuit houses there were in places like Nagashima. But anyway, this is how strongly it affected them. And if you think about what I showed you in terms of the tea houses, why would a tea house be a very amenable place for Christian Catholic priests to encounter and make friends, and to establish friendships, and to witness to their faith? You can notice that in the tea room, the tokonoma almost never has any kind of image in it. Doesn't have any imagery anywhere in the structure except for nature, and perhaps a scroll. And yeah, sometimes there might be a quote from a Buddhist text, but often it's just a bit of poetry about the season. There's nothing else in this room that has any kind of sectarian or Buddhist association. The Zen tradition especially was very drawn to tea, and some Zen masters, that is priests, were drawn, Zen priests were drawn to practice tea as a way of praxis, of expressing their religious, living a kind of religiousness of being in the moment, of being totally present in focusing everything in a particular activity. This is where the teaching about it's the Tathagata Garbha teaching in Buddhism, that every point in the universe has the potential for enlightenment. Any activity, therefore, can be a form of spiritual practice. And so tea became a spiritual practice for some Zen teachers in Zen monasteries. And sometimes the roshis had tea rooms where they would serve tea to their disciples or their patrons. So I think that's one of the reasons Valignano saw this as a good cultural practice to develop. But I think he also realized that it has a benefit into the psychology and the spirituality of anyone who goes in, including the Jesuits of the house where they were living. So as a way of sort of talking about this and to sum up and to connect with our garden project and what I've discussed already, and maybe there's a place on the Gonzaga campus to think about having a center for tea ceremony and a garden to go with it. And I'll talk about how we ginned up a whole series of benefits that Holy Cross would get from this. But I'm always faced with this from these advancement people, and there's a new one every other year, it seems. Why? And the obvious question is, why would a Catholic place build a Japanese garden? What's wrong with you? Well, we have 4 or 5 Virgin Mary, statues around the campus. So why would we do this? Well, first of all, the culture of Holy Cross is that we're trying to be the best Catholic liberal arts college in the country. And so we're part of the global liberal arts education. And so these gardens represent a very powerful, a very strong dose of non-Western civilization. And indeed, something very admirable and extraordinary. These gardens are remarkable cultural spaces. They've been built now all over the world, because people find them compelling. And so it would be an ornament on the campus that would also express our strength in Asian studies. So that was answer number 1. The answer number 2 is that it expresses Jesuit tradition. And there's been much recent scholarship about this, about Jesuits as really part of the first wave in the first generations of this connection between the European world and the Asian world. And so to me, I'm so impressed by the fearlessness of these men like Francis Xavier and Matteo Ricci. I don't always agree with where they're coming from and some of the fierceness of their wanting to have people abandon their own Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Indian culture. I think in many ways, at least Jesuits that I'm familiar with at Holy Cross, it's finding God in all things, and all those in all things can include insights from other world religions. So I've had tremendous support for what I do at Holy Cross from the Jesuit community, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but a little bit more about it. But I think it's a remarkable and laudable and I think important characteristic of the Jesuits that they led this sort of exploration of the world and brought back insights. The book by Rodriguez.
Maybe a combination of
Rodriguez was a young boy when he was brought as I forget what is, a novice kind of, to serve in the first Jesuit houses that were established in Hiroshima.
First class, I was like, oh, Hillary.
He was quite remarkable
That was like my first class.
in that he stayed and became very fluent in Japanese. And he had a facility that a lot of the older men did not have. So he wasn't an aristocrat. He wasn't well educated before he got there. So his history of Japan is very full of lists and not a lot of interpretation, but it's a remarkable document. And in fact, his writings are used by Japanese historians of this time, because sometimes, as I say, the outsider's perspective has no necessary bias in it. He may not have understood things, but he understood them pretty well, because he wrote his Historia, it's called, near the end of his stay, once all the Jesuits and all the Catholics and all the Europeans were asked to leave, except for the Dutch, in the harbor of Nagasaki. He finally wrote down, and he was quite good at it. And there's no doubt that he has about his familiarity and love of tea, because 4 chapters in this Historia are devoted to tea. And he clearly loved these gatherings, and he participated in many of them. He thinks tea is the greatest medicine and natural thing in the world. He promotes it. That's part of what he's so enthusiastic about. It's good for everything. But it also, the art of cha, tea is what, cha is a tea in Japanese and in Chinese, across Asia, is courtesy, good breeding, modesty, moderation in exterior actions, peace and quiet of body and soul, exterior modesty without any pride, arrogance, fleeing from all exterior ostentation, pomp, display, and splendor of social life. It's a humbling simplicity that tea cultivates in the character of those who engage it, that make the tea, and who accept the tea and are part of this tea culture. So to me, this is a very fantastic witness to the value of cross-cultural and interreligious interaction and understanding. And I've really enjoyed. He's fun to read sometimes, in that he's a very simple-minded person in some ways, but he also tries to get to the heart of things. So, when I look at this now, I think of Rodriguez. I think of, this eyes wide open and entering fully into another culture. It's what, I'm part of my training is in anthropology, and this ability to cross over to the other side and to participate and to learn the local language and to master a cultural form like this is truly extraordinary. And this young man was very successful at it, and he influenced generations of Jesuits of the value of this kind of in-depth, not superficial, but in-depth connection with the people of Asia. The third reason that we should build, and maybe you should build, a Japanese garden is what happens if you mention this and familiarize the counseling service with the effects of tea and tea ceremony and being in gardens and all. I thought this was going to get us over the top originally, and it helped, because I don't know I suspect Gonzaga is not unlike Holy Cross, especially these days under the epidemic. There's so much stress and trouble, and college students, and my son's at Holy Cross himself as a junior. I mean, it's always stressed out. We're always stressed out. We always, just, not just at finals, but, in the daily coping with it. So the whole idea of having a refuge like the tea house, or the tea building, or looking out and sitting quietly at a garden, a place of refuge from the daily life, just the way these gardens were that to the merchants in the dusty markets of Osaka. This is a very positive contribution that these could make to campus community and the student life especially. The fourth reason is about Jesuit spirituality. As I say, our Jesuit community is very much about the social justice world, as well as this interreligious connection. And since I came to Holy Cross in 1993, I invited one particular father who's an extraordinary figure, who taught at St. Peter's College, and I think he's now been retired for a few years. And his name is the unforgettable name of Robert Kennedy. And Bob Kennedy has sitting communities in New York City and over North Jersey. And he's probably come and done 10 programs over the years for me. And in 2016, Holy Cross awarded him an honorary degree for this interreligious work that he has done. And there are other Jesuits who fall into this, and other Catholic priests who have found that Zen and the culture of Zen, including the tea, world of tea and gardens, really work together and make a positive contribution to their work, both in the classroom and spiritually. So to me, that's an important witness to the world that the Catholic tradition and Holy Cross are open to this kind of, it's in our mission statement that we're open to conversing with other peoples and other religions. And then the fifth reason that's important to me, and we try to have a big a tent as possible. We could imagine having gardening clubs of students, community, and faculty who maintain the place, in addition to a classroom space, in addition to tea that could be taught and practiced, and then as a place for really wonderful small-scale concerts. If you've ever heard the Japanese flute, bamboo flute called the shakuhachi, the shakuhachi concert in that multi-purpose room would be just a moment of great aesthetic expression and experience for everyone. And you know, we have a meditation club that's based upon Vipassana meditation and Zazen that Father Kennedy has taught at Holy Cross over the years. So this is a place where all this could happen. And my sixth and last answer, which is somewhat cheeky, and I don't mean to cast all administrators in this role, but I find the growth and expansion of administrative figures, the assistants and the assistants to the assistants, on down, that have just inhabited in greater and greater numbers Holy Cross, like many other schools. I find that sometimes they think of colleges like a factory that you're producing, and they're, you know, they're customers, and they come in and they, you know, and then they finally leave, and colleges should be considered like a business. And when I saw this quote by a writer named Jack Snyder talking about what this phenomenon, and he uses the words of gardens. Colleges are much more like gardens than they are like factories. They are products of attention, devotion, and love. They are complex systems that demand our time and respond to our care. So I'd prefer much more the organic and the living and the subtle touch of, and the decisive action at time. When you prune things, you better have your A game on, because you can't take it back when you cut a limb off of a tree or a shrub. But I'd like us to think more of college in those terms than in this business model or mechanical model. So gardens would be there to remind us of that. So that's where I'll finish. And I'd love to have questions. There are all kinds of ways to go with this, but I hope some of you have had a chance to visit and have tea served to you and be part of that, or visit these gardens. They are transformative places. And even if people have no background, no experience, to go and to visit the Portland Garden, or to go to an authentic Japanese tea or dry garden is a truly memorable experience and potentially transformative. So with that, I'll step back and welcome your questions and say, Gloria, how do you want to do this?
Okay, thank you. Imagine that yes, can you see everyone is clapping? Yay. Thank you so much for Dr. Todd Lewis's great sharing and a lecture. Now we are starting the Q&A session. You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. There should be an icon for reactions at the bottom of your Zoom window. When you click it, you will see an option to raise your hand with a palm symbol. As I have 4 pages to flip through to see the whole audience on my screen. Please wait just for a second. If I don't call your name immediately, you can also enter your question in the chat box. Stacia. Hi, Stacia.
You have to unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
unmute. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, my equipment went out for a few minutes. Thank you so much for that, Todd. That was just amazing. Here's a question that really plagues me about anything like this. So if you're going to do something like this that is, the intention is like intercultural awareness, intercultural engagement, intercultural understanding, how do you navigate that line between cultural appropriation and intercultural engagement? You see what I mean? I mean, did you have any challenges to that when you were designing the garden?
Well, if we just look at tea, all the Japanese tea schools, and especially Urasenke, feel that their mission is to spread tea around the world. They are an international organization, and one of our first approaches was to ask them if they'd want to build a garden and do this at Holy Cross, and then we were so naive about Urasenke. They're wonderful teachers, but they said, no, you pay us $100,000 to put our name on your tea house. So, but to me, it does require a commitment to have a trained person on the faculty who knows this or associated with the college. And I have an Urasenke teacher in Boston who comes and does workshops. And I've brought Jennifer Anderson 3 or 4 times. It's not as easy. You know, the funding is a lot more to bring someone from San Francisco. But so my experience with the tea people is that they're outgoing and wanting to spread the experience to others. So the gardens can easily become cliches or not. If you just did it yourself, and that's why it makes it expensive, you could end up not getting it or doing something that is pathetic ripoff or attempt to imitate Japanese. But that's why so my own compass was to find someone who really is committed to the tradition. So I don't know, I don't, in this case, I don't feel that, you know, we're making an investment and going to pay Japanese carpenters, gardeners. I mean, that's why we got up to 4 million. I mean, I know what I did. I should have said, no, we can do this some other way. But no, I want the fully authentic individuals. One of the biggest firms that builds Japanese gardens all over the world, I found out, is found in a suburb of Boston. And I've become friends with this guy. I teach a course called Gardens and World Religions. And it makes the scientists' eyes roll at our college because they think, oh, what is that? But in fact, every religion, every major world religion has a garden form that it's just another cultural way to approach their core teachings. Gardens are expressions of utopias or ideal worlds. And so Islamic gardens are Christian monastic gardens. Chinese gardens, scholars, and Zen and Buddhism in Japan. It's a fantastic way, and then you go take class trips to go visit these places. But to me, this is one way to really expose people to an environment that derives from that tradition. So that's how I would approach answering that. Mark, you have a question?
Yes, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I am curious as to the Jesuit connection to the underlying tradition of Chado with respect to how Zen Buddhism kind of derives, its overall worldview from, you know, the ancient Chinese concept of Tao as it sort of traveled into Japan. So my question is, to what extent were the Jesuits concerned about enculturation of the, you know, in other words, adopting certain cultural principles like Matteo Ricci did into the culture versus seeing a parallel to the underlying theological principle of seeing God in all things, which is very much what Tao would be, I guess, in at least some extension. So can you talk a little bit to the Jesuit, what the Jesuit perspective of, what their motivation was to build the tea houses, as was it to attract, like you said, to attract the elite, or was it to actually have a spiritual experience with God in all things?
Yeah, that gets right to the heart of things in some ways. Well, I do think there's a strategic reason. These are upper class. This is upper class culture, and that's who they wanted to meet. But you know, the writings are very limited in getting to that issue. So, you know, it's hard to deal with silence in sources, and we have to say we don't know. We don't have all of the sources. Apparently, there are some letters are still being found from those who were in Japan, but Rodriguez himself doesn't seem to have much of a. I mean, you can see what he wrote. It was about character formation and how, you know, there's a certain nobility but you know, the humbleness and the spareness of it. I think that would appeal to Jesuits, but I don't see the theology ever coming out. In Ricci, you do for sure. But I have nothing to go on. I wish I did, because then it gets really interesting. So I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. I wish we could have more intimate knowledge about that kind of thinking. The Jesuits did like the Zen people. I will say that, but it's always about their, it's interpersonal. They're not talking theology or Tao or Shunyata, or, you know, they're not getting into the Dharma very far. I mean, we know from Rodriguez got into trouble because he was called upon to be an intermediary between the merchants in the port and the bafuko, the shogun officials. And he apparently got a little bit too inside and he got in trouble. So I don't think he was, I don't know. It's dangerous to go too far in speculating, but he seemed to be more interested in this worldly business deals than probing the spiritual depths of Buddhism.
Hi, Todd. Father Dame Mai has a question.
Hi.
Please unmute yourself. At the bottom of your Zoom window, if you click, oh yes, now you're unmuted.
No, the host was blocking me earlier. So thank you, Dr. Lewis. Very informative. I very much enjoy it. And I'm a Jesuit, and I did my tertianship in Japan. And I read a lot about Alessandro Vaiano at the time and the tea house. And in response to Mark earlier, I didn't have a common response.
Please.
My understanding is that the early Jesuit in Japan, they struggled to express the concept of God in Japan compared to the one in China, Matteo Ricci, because Tianchu, that's mean heaven, Tian. So that they were a lot easier to work with the Chinese in terms of enculturation, whereas the Japanese, the Jesuit, they have a very hard time to express the concept of God. In fact, they will still use a Latin word to express God. They don't have a Japanese character at the time. So that's what the problem in the enculturation. But also Japan, the Jesuit, because Japan was not a unified country at the time, So a lot of law, a lot of what you call that, shoguns, a lot of samurai, different area. So they were not able to unify the country. They were not the unified leader where China have an emperor. So the Japanese in Japan at the time, they were still struggle to negotiate with different tribe, I guess, different territory, whereas in China, that's only one in Nanjing at the time. So that's my understanding of it.
Well, there was that movie that was released a few years ago. What's it called? Silence?
Mm-hmm.
That depicts the period after all the missionaries were expelled and some Jesuits came back sort of secretly. And the one Jesuit who had gone over or given up his faith was despairing that, and it's a serious despair, I thought, that this encounter, we're not even sure anymore that they're understanding what we're saying, what our theology teaches, and that it's all, we have a fantasy in our mind. They're in understanding our faith, Christianity, in terms of their own categories, which it's really not a conversion. It's something else. And I, as someone who negotiates interculturally, sometimes I wonder how far we really go through. I studied anthropology with the famous Margaret Mead. I had her last methods class before she died. I was very lucky. And she said, at best, intercultural work is like touching someone through a chain link fence. You can touch, you can see, but you never really fully cross over. And I don't know, that's, I mean, you know, going native is everyone's fantasy, and sometimes we like to pretend that we're there. And I keep an office in Kathmandu, and I participate in all kinds of things. I have to give public speeches, which I hate, and be interviewed on the radio. But I still have so many questions, so much I don't understand and will never know. And so, you know, I don't mean to undermine this whole prospect of intercultural understanding, but I think there are limits. And in some ways, that silence in the tea room and that brotherhood or that interpersonal, this connecting deeply with another person beyond words, to me makes a lot of sense. You can feel something and very profoundly, but once you start to talk about it, you may find it's not quite so clear after all.
Okay.
Gloria-san.
Yes, thank you so much. Now it's my turn. Yeah. So Todd, I would like to share the audience that beautiful image of the teacup on your article. Especially we have Dr. Matt Root from Art Department. He is teaching pottery on campus. So I think that's a good image I would like to share with the audience. Is that okay?
Please share.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope you have it. I don't have the article on my screen anywhere.
So everyone, here is can you see it? So here, this bowl, these teacups in the same design were also made by Christian converts who were tea practitioners. Yeah, I just think this is a beautiful art object that shows the commonality between, or the common appreciation about the tea, even for different reasons, between Japanese people and the Jesuits. Yeah, and another fascinating thing about the teacups is they are so pricey, especially for those asymmetrical one, $1,000 US. So I just don't know. Yeah,
you can go on eBay and see just how true that is.
It just beyond my imagination. Why a teacup just one will cost 1,000 US dollars. So yeah, anything you can share why I know because they are handmade, they are not made by machine, but just one cup like 1,000 US dollars, just beyond my mind. Yeah.
I have a colleague at Holy Cross who teaches creative writing, and when she graduated from Princeton, she did 2 years as a pottery apprentice. She wrote about this experience, and I taught a Zen class with her a couple of years ago, and it's true. And the one thing that you don't want is a symmetrical teacup. They have to have a little bit, and the finishes on them also. I mean, what you just showed is characteristic of that. All kinds of experiments. They were always experimenting with the slips, the coating you put on the teacups and the tea implements.
So does that mean, so maybe Matt Root, I'm going to put you on the spot because you are the expert of pottery. So is that more difficult to make a symmetrical teacup? Do you know how to unmute yourself? At the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a reaction. When you click reaction, no, not on the left corner, there's a microphone. Then you click it. Then you should unmute yourself. Oh yeah, now you're unmute. And now you unmute yourself again. Oh, now you're unmuted.
You had me muted. I couldn't unmute myself because of the administrator. But anyway, yeah, so your question is about forming something. Is it more difficult to form something that's not necessarily? I think it takes a lot of practice to make something that has a more organic form, like the Japanese wabi-sabi aesthetic. And it's an aesthetic that I use in my work, or that I try to achieve in my work. And I borrowed heavily from, Japanese aesthetic. But it just depends on what you want to make, I guess. And I think the reason those tea bowls are so expensive in Japan is the culture really appreciates and understands those tea bowls and those objects and the artists that make them. And then there's also this really, really rich history of masters that spend their entire life trying to make, this incredible form, and then this apprenticeship that goes along with it. And so it's just culturally, I think, more appreciated than it is in the United States. Here you want everything cheap, and my tea bowls aren't that expensive, but that's just the way it is here. It's kind of sad, actually. And the tea bowl is so important to the ceremony. I mean, when there's this taking in of this object, like how does the rim relate to the belly of the piece, to the foot of the piece? There's looking at the bottom of it. The bottom of it is just as important as everything else. So it's also how the cup comes together as a whole. And it's more of an experience. And so this object is adding to this experience of this ceremony. And there's this texture to it. So you're feeling it, you're bringing it to your lips. So it's very experiential. So it's just not a damn cup, I guess, is the bottom line of that story. And so how do you get, the user is also, this object is transformative for them as well, and it's this meditation while you're using it and feeling the cup and all that stuff. But
yeah, I'm lucky that I witnessed all the beautiful cups that you made before. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Sosha has comments in the chat box. Not Christian, some feedback.
I can just say to Matt that my colleague who still makes pots is named Leela Phillip. And Leela says that the potters are going out of business in Japan because the Japanese also see the value of mass-produced inexpensive teacups too. And so this old aesthetic is one that's, like everywhere else, is not being appreciated as it used to be to the same extent.
Yeah. So Sasha, you have a feedback. Why don't you briefly share? I know you put it in the chat box, but yeah. How can I? Oh, yeah. For some Zoom setting, how can I unmute everyone? I think I already asked all to unmute. Okay. Oh, now you can.
I can speak now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Just all I wanted to say is right there. I'm sorry, it was a paragraph. But yeah, I was just very, very relieved to see that ADA had been accounted for. I know that legally it's supposed to be, but the fact that there had been thought put into adapting how everything was going to be landscaping wise and architecturally and everything, also with considering the purpose of every aspect of what you're designing was really, it was really nice to see that. And it would just be nice to know that people could actually go ahead and be able to experience a place like that. And also, yeah, I just was thinking, I always think of class, maybe it's just because I've been like a scholarship and grant-based student who otherwise couldn't afford to attend private liberal arts colleges. But I also consider it a thing where it's like, yeah, this could actually help some folks have dialogue with one another, expand their horizons, and also just like the value of interreligious dialogue and also discussing the arts and everybody's different worldviews. I think that's just, I don't always feel like there is a lot of places for that to happen, and also places for that to happen that incorporate nature in a way that people are not used to viewing it here in the West. And that's all I wanted to say. And thank you.
Well, thank you so much for these beautiful insights. Yeah, yeah.
I can tell you that
Yeah.
I'm now on the editorial board of this journal of the North American Japanese Garden Association. And the real hot topic now for making these gardens has to do with their healing, their connection with rehabilitation and hospitals. Apparently the University of Florida Hospital in Gainesville has just built a Japanese garden. And so that's definitely something that's come into awareness. And of course, they all have to be accessible to people who are rehabbing. So that's where a lot of energy is going now, because people have studied the effects of this kind of environment versus the suburban view out the back window of some place, which this is what you want. This is the way I want to recover if I'm in this kind of environment.
Okay, thank you so much for everyone's participation. I mean, first of all, I really appreciate Dr. Todd Lewis' great sharing related to Zen tea and Jesuits. And I also appreciate my colleagues, my students, my friends, and especially our GU Jesuits attending this lecture. This may be the first time here at Gonzaga I see so many Jesuit priests attending an event. So really, really thank you for all your participation. And let's give Dr. Todd Lewis the last welcome. Thank you.
To see you again sometime.
Yeah.
I wonder if I would ever have had this kind of size of an audience at Holy Cross. I don't think so. I always think the West Coast is closer to the future than the East Coast. I think you all are there.
We all do too.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're right.
And I will email the article written by Dr. Todd Lewis that has also has a great information about the interactions between Jesuit missionaries in Japan and the Zen tea. Okay, and also the recording. Okay, thank you for joining me again, and have a good evening.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.